All right. So, welcome everybody to another lecture, our third lecture series for Fuller's ANST lecture series, spring of 2025. Um, Glad to see you all. And again, please fill out this survey just for attendance in our records. That way we can get information on where you are right now, and that way we can have that data to give to ANST. And then we wanted to make a quick announcement. If you're thinking about joining the Fuller ANST leadership team for 2025-2026, the next school year, um, we encourage you to apply. Stay tuned for more information on how to apply and where to apply and all of that. But just wanted, if you put that in your guys' minds, if you guys are interested to be part of the leadership team for next year. And I also wanted to announce some didactic opportunities, very, very good didactic opportunities that are available. Um, you can, it's on the email that I sent you guys. Some of it is free, some are paid, but it's very interesting. I'm going to be sending these out when I get them, I think every month. And this is this month's didactic opportunities. And there's more didactic opportunities on our website. And today we have speaking Dr. Elsa Baena. She's a bilingual neuropsychologist. She is practicing in Arizona, Washington State, and California. She earned her master's degree in psychology and doctoral degree in neuropsychology from the University of Arizona. She completed her postdoc fellowship in Spanish cross-cultural adult neuropsychology at Baylor College of Medicine. She is fluent in English and Spanish. Her expertise includes the neuropsychological assessment and rehabilitation of individuals with a variety of neurological diagnoses, including neurodegenerative conditions, acquired brain injuries, cardiovascular diseases, and brain tumors. She also conducts pre and post surgical evals for deep brain stimulation and epilepsy surgeries. And she's a member of the APA, the National Latinx Psychological Association, ACN and INS, and NAN, and Sociedad Colombiana de Neuropsicología. All right, and you can take it away, Dr. Van.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. That picture is completely different. Today I'm wearing my Peruvian sweater because it's a holiday, so I figured to be Latina with Cesar Chavez Day. Juan mentioned, and thank you, Juan and Edita and everybody from the ANST program. I'm very proud of here that this program is happening at Fuller. Um, Juan mentioned to talk about how I became a neuropsychologist. And I feel like every neuropsychologist can go back and say, oh, it was because my family member has dementia or something else. To me, it was a process. I'm from Colombia, and I volunteer kind of like in the VA system there, but it's not for veterans, it was for active duty military personnel in Colombia. So I saw a lot of the brain injury that happened in military. My country at that point was in a civil war. So before I immigrated to the US, I will say that I was pretty interested on the effects of what happens when you have an injury to the individual, to the families, to the system. However, it was here in the US that I became very interested on research, and I feel that neuropsychology is like a perfect combination between research, academia, neurology, but being also very empathic and psychologically minded. So I guess I ended up being a neuropsychologist. So I did my undergrad in a small university up in Ohio where I was with family. And over there, I had the opportunity to do research. So it worked. And then I did a post-bac program because I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to do biomedical research, something like that. And I was very lucky to go to Duke University, where I became a technician for fMRI. So I learned a lot of good research. But I also got to work with an amazing mentor who made got his PhD from place where I ended up getting my PhD, the University of Arizona. And I do want to point out that when you have good mentors, and this is many, many years ago, but I still consider him the best mentor I have ever had. I do want to point out that when you and we're very different. He's a apple pie white guy, still does research in Ohio, but every time I have to make a decision about a career or something, I call Scott because people do have a huge effect on who you end up being in life, even though I don't do much research nowadays. Having a good mentor really can make it or break it in this career. And then I got my PhD from the University of Arizona, very lucky there. Um, a lot of research, lots of clinical experiences in a state. So I got to start doing things in Spanish. And when I went to internship, I ended up going to Canada for some reason. A lot of research at the time, and that was where I was going. But I got to work with Spanish patients. Uh, and at that point, family things happened. So you always have to consider that grad school is only 5, 6 years of your life, but your life is happening at the same time. So make sure that you're always having a good life, work-life balance type of thing. And that's when I switched. I was going to go more to like a research, writing grants life, and that didn't happen. I ended up going towards a postdoc, clinical postdoc. I was the first graduate for that postdoc at Baylor. At that point, there was only 2 programs in the nation that will train me as a bilingual neuropsychologist in Spanish and English. One here in LA, which I'm very proud to have students have trained with me and then go there, and the one in Baylor. Now I know there is other programs, so I'm also excited to be able to see that other upcoming neuropsychologists get to have more options and opportunities to get trained. And then after postdoc, I wanted to continue working in medical centers with training the students. So my first job was in Phoenix, Baylor, Barrow Neurological Institute. And about 2 years ago, I transitioned to UCLA Olive View Hospital. And I've been here for about 2 years. And I've been very lucky to meet students from Fuller, Edita and Juan and Jasmine, and right now Hannah, and looking forward for the students that are coming next year. Okay, so that's my path. Any questions, please stop me at any point.
If you guys do have any questions, don't be afraid to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask or type it in the chat.
And you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. So my presentation is called, oh, can you see it completely or did it go back to?
It was on presenter mode and it just went off right now.
Okay,
There you go.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So my presentation is, let's talk about norms. This is a fun story. First couple of days that we had a student, his question is like, what are norms? And I was like, oh, okay, let's go back. So I'm sure that in some of your classes, you guys have given the waste or some of other tests. And norms are when we compare that patient that we have in front of us with the normative sample of that test that we are administering. And then there are generally some appendixes in the back. And as neuropsychologists, we do a lot of that. So as a supervisor, I spend tons of time teaching students how do you administer this test, what are the basal and what are the stopping rules, the discontinue rules. But I don't think that we spent as much time at the beginning talking about what are norms, mostly because a lot of you will have classes about stats and assessment, but sometimes norms just get spoken really quickly. So I can spend talking about norms hours. But before we do that, I have a quote here from a close colleague, Dr. Pergetano, who is actually from Pasadena. So I know Fuller is from Pasadena. He's an amazing person, and I love what he said in his book about neuropsychology being a balance between scientific research, scientific views. So norms are that. We have, we have studied how we give this test, what it means to have an impairment in that test, or things like that, but also listening to the patient's subjective experience. So we should take a lot of time uh, listening to the patient, why they're here, where is their understanding of where they're coming for a neuropsych assessment, what are the fears. We have a lot of patients that have seen family members have dementia or something like that. So they're like super nervous. Is this going to happen to me? But also interpreting that with the objective data that the patient is giving us. So that's what we need to learn about norms, and also with what the person is telling us about how their life is. And I tend to tell my students that by the time you leave a clinical interview, you should be able to have some hypothesis of what you think is happening with this patient, or what the data, the tests and the norms are going to tell you. And I like to think about every patient I see as a study of N1. That way I'm always testing my hypothesis, and I'm being like, oh, is this what I was expecting with what the person was telling me their complaints was? Or like, oh, the family told me this. Would I have expected that in a particular test that I saw? So uh, I just love this quote. So I like to tell my students that please always, at the beginning, you're going to spend lots of time learning the ways and learning the CVLT, and knowing how to stop and where to do some things. And I know a lot of students find this part very time consuming, but once you get that, you get to learn and do some of the fun things of neuropsychology, which is when you talk about norms and what are norms, and how a test are developed and where the tests come from. Who sat down and said, oh, we should do a list of items versus a supermarket list? Or should we tell a story when we're talking about memory? Or why do we test attention this way and not a particular other way? And in life, and I know that students tend to have a hard time with that, uh, generally one test measures multiple domains, like language as I'm talking, but also attention. And my favorite is the RAO, the Ray complex figure, which is measuring, visual spatial abilities. But it also, if the person has executive function problems, so poor planning, we see it on that test. And then we are not measuring memory, visual memory, because the person learned it incorrectly, because when they were drawing it initially, it didn't help that they were disorganized or that they were not seeing the entire picture. So although tests and norms are developed in a particular way and we want to be standardized on that, sometimes the domain and the test tell us more about what should we do. And if you are a neuropsychologist, you have a patient in front of you, you should always be asking yourself about this test, or whatever I'm going to put this person through. I tell my patients, nobody loves coming to see me. They don't want to be doing 6 hours of neuropsych testing where you're asking and asking and asking questions, and you are testing limits. So you really want to know until what point they cannot go anymore, right? So should I use this test for this particular question or referral, or should I use another test that will tell us the same information, but maybe quicker? And then other questions that I can talk about when we talk about norms is uh, what test should I use? We have CVLT2, CVLT3, when it's valid to use an older version or a newer version. Nowadays, I'm sure you guys are starting to learn the WAIS 5, but that means more computers. I work with a lot of older adults in a county hospital. I'm not really sure when my hospital will be able to buy iPads and all of that. So should it means that I should not be using the Waze 5? Uh, when is it valid to maybe continue using one or the other? And I love to ask this question to my students is like, when do you decide that you love a particular test or that you don't like a particular test and why? So I generally will tell my students when they're learning the ways or some of those first initial tests, the Boston naming, the CVLT, is to really go to where the manual is and open it and start looking at it because it will give you a lot of information that sometimes because you will learn hundreds of tests, hundreds. But it's in those first tests when you're getting the basis where you're able to do that. You may not be able to do it for every test you do from there on, but now you know where to gather the information, and that will help you when you're thinking about for this particular patient, I will do that particular test because it fits my person the best. Um, Another thing that I tell all my students is when you are talking about, okay, how do you want to test this patient? The answer cannot be, oh, we should do the waste because it's the only test I know. That is not ethical. uh, or it's the only test that my supervisor taught me to do. Or, even though you're still in a training mode and you're still young and you should be learning all of these things on your own, the most recent three podcasts from Navigating Neuropsychology are actually talking about norms. So I listened to them today as I was getting ready for this presentation, but I had started listening to them. You're going to have to continue always updating your norms and your knowledge because there will be new papers. Uh, the performance validity literature changes every year. That's something that you're going to have to be doing. I didn't like the tome when I was in training. I found it long and it Q has 15 to 20 minutes. However, nowadays it's like my to-go test is like the gold standard. I also like the green and other tests, but that this idea that you may marry a test, as I call it, because you really find it helpful and you have learned the norms and you know how they was developed, really will help you your knowledge of how you are going to approach a patient for that part of that quote that is the objective data. Okay. So as I was saying, know your test, know your norms, and understand what that means. So when you learn the ways, you can go to the indexes in the back of these A, B, C tables and all of that. Or you can be lucky if your university or your lab has it or your uh, clinic has it. You open a computer and you input the patient's information, the date, and then it outputs another little table with scale scores, standard scores, C scores, T scores, and all of that. And that number is what we interpret, right? That's when we tell somebody, oh, your average in this score or your performance was in the exceptionally low range. That means is, two standards or more below what we consider average for a person with your age or your education or your ethnicity. And actually, I will say that with a quote because some tests like the WAIS do not have corrections for age and education. The WAIS only gives you scale scores and that's only for age. So knowing those things and knowing where like for this particular test, you are going to get a C score, right? That's your stats class. What does that mean? And from what article you're looking at that and going to look at the normative sample for that particular article. For like the Latinos patients that I see, we will use the NESBIS, which is actually created by Ponton here in LA. And if you look at the original data, his sample of males that are 75 or older that have a greater education than 9 is only 25 people. So I see more than 25 patients in my clinic a year. So every time I'm interpreting that, right, I know the test. I know that unfortunately, that's all we have. Uh, and then, but that helps me still because maybe this particular patient is the perfect sample. He grew up in LA. He's the perfect sample for the data that we're seeing. So I will still use the test, even though I could be using something else. So you taking the time as you're learning the test to think about how you're going to interpret that test and what it means. It really is a lot of work at the beginning, but later on it's going to get super easier. So that will be my thing. So learning to interpret those scores and the normative sample and to look at those things is very important. And I do want to point out that I will know if a student knows the difference between a scale score, a standard score, a Z-score, when they are not taking into consideration those aspects, right? Scale scores are usually only H. And even for that, if you think about it, if you think about the ways, which is, I will say, the test that all of you should know back and forth, when you look at those tables, how did we decide that 44 to 54 was a good breaking point instead of 44 to 50 and 50 to 54, right? All of those things are arbitrary, right? But when you actually see how the test was developed and the sample that it went in, and actually in the ways, and I will show you in a little bit, they will in the manual they will actually put a picture of all the places where they got the sample. So taking 5 minutes for you to know that, you will actually be very educated to know if this is a test that you will marry, that you will use later on, that you will continue to use, or that you will use maybe every now and then. So uh, as neuropsychologists, you will learn a bunch of stuff about neurology and all of the other things, but it's in this psychometrics. And I know I didn't love stats when I was in grad school, but learning all of this, even though just the basics, will really put you apart to when you're starting to do more things in neuropsychology, right? Really reading how they recruited that people, and at the end of the day, you should be thinking is this test, is the normative test that was created for this particular ways, is representative of the patient that you have right in front of you. And you should always be thinking of that as you continue to know your norms and your tests. Okay. And I do want to point out that we always talk about being average or always looking for low scores, but we have to remember that in healthy individuals, there will always be a low score every now and then. As a neuropsychologist, what we're looking for is a pattern, right? Is this person always having problems in all of the memory tests or all of the verbal memory tests instead of or random things? Because if I was to give a test to anybody, most likely they will have at least one or two tests, 5% will be in the impaired range. But does that mean that I'm going to give a diagnosis to that person? Probably not. So you have to remember that as you are learning the tests. Okay. And that when you start putting more demographics or things of those tests, like by education, by age and IQ, by ethnicity, some of those numbers of low scores may be overrepresentative than in other of the groups. And I'm sure all of you have read about the controversy of the NFL and the HITO norms and all of that. If you haven't, it was in the New York Times. So that's part of reminding you of why this may happen. The more we do those corrections to the test, to the norms, most likely we're going to have different low scores. Okay. So when it comes to selecting a test or to selecting a normative data, there is many ways to do it by domain. And I pretty much is my first one over here, but uh, I have done this presentation where I divided by domain, and I go like, if we're going to test confrontation naming, here's all of the tests that you can do. I'm not going to be talking much about that, but what I will tell you as a student, actually, I had a notebook and I will write each of the domains, and I will like learn a new test. Oh, this is actually a language test, and I will write it and I will go study it later. And I did this for verbal memory, working memory, executive functions, and all of that. So I recommend that as you are learning more on neuropsych, it may be one extra thing that you do, but it will actually be helpful for you as you continue to practice, because maybe in your externship or in your practicum, they will only have 2 to 3 tests. I love the place where I work in View, but for the longest time, we didn't have my preferred naming test, which is the NAB naming. They only had the Boston naming, and we played around and we finally got it. But I still will say that for certain illnesses like epilepsy, doing the Boston naming is better than doing the NAB naming. So these are the type of things that if you have taken the time to actually learn and read, and maybe it's even just a little thing to, oh yeah, this is very similar. And the only difference that this is pictures that are color and beautiful, and these ones are just random little paper, like looking like drawings, really weird drawings. Um, Maybe this for older adults may be better, and this for younger people will be better. So if you have actually sat down and look at those things by domain, that will also give you an ahead of time. Uh, the second way to learn about norms and tests is by etiology. The manual, believe it or not, will actually tell you the studies that have been done with that particular illness, etiology's illness, for those particular patients. Like CVLT has been studied very well with epilepsy, with memory, like dementias, and they will give you some pointers of what studies have been published with that. But like for multiple sclerosis, there's been a battery of tests that has been proposed by people that see only multiple sclerosis patients, and they say for this population, this is the test that you should use. And they actually even have norms that are for healthy people without multiple sclerosis, and these are the norms for people that have been used the same test, but they have had multiple sclerosis for a while, and this can help you determine if this person has or no. So as you're learning some of those things, learning by etiology, going to the website of the Epilepsy um, um, International League, uh, actually they also have a battery and all of those things. The third way is by demographics, which, as I was telling you, learning if a test has gender subdivisions. In this case, we know that females are better at verbal memory. So the CVLT3, if you use the scoring in the computer, they do have that subdivision. The manual doesn't. So that will help you determine if for my patient, I should probably use the CVLT2 or the 3 that has that subdivision of gender, because my patient is a female and maybe she also has other things like hypothyroidism. And we also know that hypothyroidism will affect learning list of words. So that may be the most sensitive test for that particular patient that you have. We know that race and ethnicity may be a proxy for education, and there has been a lot of research about that. But also looking at if the test that you're using may have an education breakdown. We know that education may be very different than in different parts of the country or the I work with a lot of people from Mexico, South America. And so knowing all those differences may be really helpful to choosing a test and a normative sample. And even further, even using some of the regression norms that are now being proposed because they're using of tests that are conglomerate and they can give you more uh, definite things is also an interesting thing to do. So by demographics, by education, kind of is in there. Uh, by training, um, probably you are in a place where they only have certain particular tests or your supervisor training a certain place, so they will prefer a particular test. By school of thinking, that will be the other way. If you are a person that is taking lots of notes when you're doing a neuropsych test and you're looking at the process of how the person is doing the test, DCAFs is one of those tests where you get lots of scores for lots of different things. And that's by a school of thinking because those processing scores may be as important as the test per se. How did the person did they self-corrected, and that error may give you a skill score that is different for the person was not aware that was making those mistakes and they didn't self-correct it, and that means do they have insight or not on their issues. I'm a big proponent on availability. Some of these tests are very expensive. I work in a county hospital. We didn't get tests for a little bit of time. Now we do. So sometimes I would love to say that I already got my hands on the WAIS 5. I haven't. So I wish I'm going to buy it pretty soon. But sometimes you work with what you have. And the last one is tests that have been co-normed. What that means is that when they co-norm the like BVMTR, they also co-norm the HVLT. So one is a verbal memory test and the other one is a visual memory test. Both of them have 6 different versions. So you can test this person 6 different times. So that way you can be validated and you can be sure that, okay, this person really has a visual memory problem, but they don't have a verbal memory problem, or the other way around. You can test multiple times and then you can remember everything about your assessment class where you learned that, practice effects, when should we retesting people, and when are these tests that have been co-normed with alternate forms, we should be use one or not. Any questions? Okay. So I say by domain. I have some presentations for this, but I know some of you have seen the ways. So it's there by memory, CVLT, naming. So in neuropsych, you're going to learn a lot of tests. So get on the habit of opening that manual, looking at those tables, really, even if it's 5-10 minutes, now that you have done, some of you have like rotated in multiple clinics, your list of tests it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's something that you may be only able to do now in grad school, but get on the habit of doing it before you marry or divorce a test that you pretty much say, oh, I really like that test because of this or that. But also when new tests come, taking the 5-10 minutes to do the same is a good habit. And there is a lot of things. I particularly don't test much of social cognition, but we know that for autism and even some of the dementias, we're seeing that actually this is a domain that we should be testing more, but sometimes we don't do it or we do it enough. So this is for you guys to know in the future. And then I wanted to give you an example by demographics. The heater norms, we all should know about the heater norms. You did train in California. So I wanted to bring it up. It's from your peeps here in San Diego. So the heater norms is a co-norm in multiple areas of the US. They're there. Those are the ones that are having a lot of problems with the NFL. And I want to point out that all the African American norms come from the San Diego sample. Okay, here is where the problem lies. Are individuals of African American descent the same in San Diego that it may be in Alabama or Mississippi? So this is what a lot of people should be reading and learning. There is the Mayo Clinics and sample and all of that. So doing some of this will really help you learn a little bit of that. Uh, they also give you in their sample that they will divide it by years of education. Uh, but you should know that a GED is 10 years of education, despite of what the person is telling you. So looking at those norms, 2004 norms, I'm hoping they're going to do an update pretty soon. Here is the little, as I was telling you, by demographics of the decafs. The decafs, let me know if you have not seen the decafs yet, but you see how Nevada is a very small sample in the corner near California where they gather the data. I know that Dean is getting new sample for the decafs too, and he's been working really hard on making it more expansive or more like that or more qualitatively. But taking the time to actually look at the table will explain to you why maybe some people that train in different parts of the US may not love the decafs. I will say that now that I live in California, the heating and the decafs usually are the tests that people prefer in here, and you should know the benefits or the not of the pros of the test. For the ways, same thing. Here is a little sample of where they got the sample, and majority 70% of the sample for the ways 4 was Caucasian, white people, and majority of them had a high school or more. Um, and majority of them were recruited from the south of the US. So, uh, and I do have a story about this. We tend to think that the ways the Pearson test their individuals in a very special environment. I actually learned that they're not as strict as we are when we are learning the test. I met somebody that was a Pearson tester, and I learned a lot of things that makes me feel that you have to remember that a test, a norm, is the true score plus error. So some of these things that we're seeing here is that little bit of error, right? Maybe I test more Hispanics, 11% of the population, which it should be pretty much simple and equal to the amount of the population that I see in the US, but maybe it's just different. So be aware of that, okay? When you're comparing the exclusion of the sample, look at those things too. Um, right now, there is something called robust norms, in which you test when they're getting the sample, they're testing the patients multiple times, especially for older adults. And after they get tested the second or the third time, they are able to remove the people that may develop dementia, for example. So the tests that are being published for those norms pretty much means that we are already sure that we don't have individuals that have some of the exclusionary criteria that we are looking for, that we want to compare our patients to or not. And then I do want to stop here. I will give you Juan these slides so you can have them, so for you to learn. But I do want to say that there is a lot of things to consider when we talk about norms. As I have mentioned, SES, education, cultural background. I test a lot of Spanish-speaking patients, and I tell my students, if just on English norms, learning norms and test is a lot. When you're testing individuals with different in Spanish, you're also multiplying by the number of countries where the norms or so are created. But we do have the same thing when it comes to like English speakers. The WATAR is a little different in here in the US than England. And I know that Australia may have different tests. So you want to be aware of some of those little things. When you're looking for the test, always remember your stats and the distributions and what it means to be in the average range or in the non so average range. And really just my goal today is for you to take 5 minutes when you're learning a test and look at the manual and learn about the norms, and learn about the normative sample, learned about if you want to do this test for the patient that you have in front of you. Because to me, when you're doing neuropsych, you really want to be able to uh, some if you were going to give a person a diagnosis because they did really bad in multiple of the tests that you gave them, and you're getting a pattern, you really want to make sure that you're using the tests that are the best representative of that person that you have right in front of you. Any questions? I know I talk a lot and very fast.
You guys can put questions in the chat too if you're not able to speak.
And again, right now in school, you're going to learn so much. How long does it take you to really learn the ways back and forth? I will say about 2 to 3 weeks every day. You know, practicing and practicing and practicing. And at some point, unfortunately, there may be a new test, and your supervisor or even yourself is like, oh, I want to try this test. And you don't have the 2 to 3 weeks to learn a particular test. That doesn't mean that you cannot uh, still use it. Once you learn the building blocks of the ways, I think the ways is the easiest test to learn, and the not the easiest, but like that should be the minimum for a clinical psychologist, not a neuropsychologist, a clinical psychologist. Um, and once you know that one, you can build in all of the other tests that you will be able to use on your little back of tests that you can say like, oh, I'm going to do this one instead of this one. Again, norms is something that you're going to be thinking as a neuropsychologist even after you are board certified, even after you are graduated. Uh, I was always told, Dr. Baena, a lawyer may ask you, why did you choose that test and not this test for this particular patient if you decide to do forensic work? And the answer cannot be, well, that's the only one I had, or my supervisor told me to, right? At one point, you're going to have to really like sit down and say like, well, for this particular patient and the sample and everything else, this is why I chose that test. And you have to go home and feel ethically okay with that answer, or you should have got another test at the end of the day too. So, but again, the test is only one of the things that you will learn. You will spend a lot of time on that. But to become a neuropsychologist, you have to be very good at the interview, at the test, and interpreting everything together. And at the end of the day, putting it in a nice, well written report uh, that will take a lot of time for you to learn. Uh, but to me, being able to answer questions to families about what's happening, or being able to give some recommendations really makes this worthwhile. So I probably also love to learn. So I'm always in conferences, uh, trying to learn the latest PVT research that is out there, or what new test has come out. But I think that probably it's because writing is as a second language is a little hard for me. But um, you hopefully you guys learned that you should talk about norms with all of your supervisors. You should be learning a lot about on your own about norms, and it will be something that you will continue to do after you are certified, hopefully, because that's the goal of being a neuropsychologist.
And this is, excuse me, this is probably another topic or another session on its own, but can you talk a little bit more on how bilingual or monolingual comes in hand with norms and just like how you choose the batteries and the norms. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So a lot of things come into mind into that. If you are testing a patient that had their education in the US and you want to get an IQ test, I'm always asked, why do you do the English ways versus maybe the Mexican or the Chilean ways? Right? The person went to education here in the US. Um, so that's one of the things that you have to think, even though maybe at home they learned Spanish first. And when you are working with bilingual patients and monolingual Spanish patients or monolingual, I also been very lucky to work with students that speak other languages. And I'm all pro doing evaluations using interpreter mediated evaluations and getting norms from different places so we can serve underserved communities. But there is a lot of additional things that you should learn and to get norms and all of that. But it just takes double of the time for like Spanish patients. A patient from Puerto Rico is very different than a patient from Argentina. So, but at the same time, a patient from um, Minnesota is going to be very different than a patient from San Diego. Are we still using the same ways? Probably. But at least when we look at the map, you get a sense that at least when they did the sample, you got a little bit of both places. And that should make you feel a little bit more secure that this patient may be more representative of the data too. Nicole?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Baena, for your lecture. This is very, very helpful. I'm currently in my clerkship and I work with older adults and at SEML. And a common question that I have when norming data, especially with heat and norms, to my understanding, at least what's the norms that we have, Heaton is for the white population or black population. That's what it was studied for, right? But let's
And
say,
again, the black is the blacks in San Diego.
right. So then what do you do when, I've had patients that are, let's say, Asian American or Latino, and were maybe born in a different part of the United States or not born in the States. Which norms would I use? That's a question that I'm often confused about, and I've heard different things. So I don't know if there's a rule of thumb that you go by.
Nope. I tend to tell my students, just in case, norm it in both, just write it down. If you're using African Americans, is this T, and Caucasian is this T, or the same happens with the Mayo Clinic norms or anything like that. So when you even look at some of my protocols for some of the tests, it looks like a laundry list. And when I have students, they struggle with my very long list of the tables. But is at the end of the day, the norms again is just one tool. It's a yardstick, right? And it happens more with like education, right? If the person only has like 9 years of education, they will look less impaired. If you're using heteronomes, that if you are using maybe the 12 years or the 16 years of education. So that's why I will say just norm it as multiple ways. And your job as a neuropsychologist, because a tech can get you the norms, your job is to interpret it. So in that case, uh, again, the example of the lawyer, Dr. Delano, why did you choose to do African American norms for a Latino patient, right? You can actually say, well, this is a Latino patient, he's a minority patient, and he was raised and born and raised in San Diego. So most likely the African American norms, which I like to call the non-majority norms group instead
Yeah.
of African American, fits better for this patient than maybe another norm, a normative sample. So you can always figure out, again, the idea is that you are matching the person that you're seeing in front of you the best you can. Are you going to be able to do it every time? No. Juan knows. I I always struggle for Spanish patients. We don't have a good story test, a story learning test, kind of like the logical memory
Mhm.
for Spanish patients. We do have a couple, but none of them are something that I love. Some don't have recognition. Some don't have that double reading the list, double reading the test multiple times. You know that when you're working with older adults, sometimes
Yeah.
you need that reading the information twice in order for them to learn it. Uh, One I love because it reads the story 5 times, but the delay is 1 hour, right? Do an older adult uh, gonna get tired of me, and maybe they're failed is because they're fatigued and tired versus do they have a true memory problem? So and I know neuropsychology as a group, we know that we need better norms and we're working on it. For example, that navigating neuropsychology, it was in 2020 that I think the DCAPS group went in and gave a talk about their new decafs too. And this is in 2020, 2021, and it still hasn't come out. And they were saying that it's like a $2 million project,
Mm.
right? And they've been working on it for at least 4 or 5 years. And they've been ready to publish. And by the time they publish, is it going to be as active as it was back in 2020 when they attempted to publish?
Mhm.
So you always have to be aware of the situation where you are. And I do think that the DCAPS group has done a really good job on keeping us like up to date. But for my understanding, they are actually allowing labs and people in universities for you to use the DCAPS for free, the DCAPS 2 for free, so they can get the data too, but people are testing it. We have a lot of data coming from the Alzheimer's research groups. Very good. That's actually one of the best stories that I have for Spanish patients, but they really don't have norms. When they publish, you just compare your patient to the raw data. Of course, that from the lab to the clinic may be a little different, but hopefully we are part of that process of bringing what people are doing in labs to clinics, right? I work in a county hospital with zero resources. I'm trying to get people from an university in Northridge that has data for Armenian patients. My first Armenian patient was here in LA. They have data, but they haven't published it. And so maybe making the connection with the hospital that I'm in right now, we may be able to get it published, and maybe we'll be able to serve that population a little better than what we're doing right now, right? So it may be perfect, no, because I believe the data was a dissertation of somebody that left maybe like 5, 6 years ago. But is it a step closer? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
I will say, yeah, laundry list.
okay.
And
Yeah,
then
that's really helpful. And I am also wondering as well with the laundry list idea, are there ever times where in a report you'll put two different norms, like Heaton, for example, and then I'm trying to think like Groove Pig board has, multiple norms. Yeah, are there ever times where like maybe you have to do two just because it is unclear which one is a better fit?
yeah, I remember one patient that in one normative sample was low average and in the other normative sample was like exceptionally high. And I'm like, I actually think this person is average. Do I feel that they're like that low? No. Do I feel that they are like above and beyond the population? No. But I had to show that, for the data we have, there is this disparity, right? So yes, I do my tables, and Juan and Edita can tell you there's sometimes a laundry list, as I call it. But again, uh, as a student, you should look at all of the sample, all of the norms, all of that, because what you are getting trained and will get paid for is to do the interpretation. We can have computers give you the norm, right? But you are the one that will say, this is actually more of what our patient is. It fits with what they're telling me in the complaint. This is what they're telling me when I left the interview. That was what was based on my hypothesis, right? This is a study of N1, right? You're always trying to match it and figure out how to do the best for your patient, right? And I guess that's also why I love neuropsychology. I love therapy, don't get me wrong, but not as much as I love finding the pattern or trying to figure out what's wrong or being able to tell a family member that this is what's going on. Uh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
thank you
do
so
think
much.
that in order to be a good clinical neuropsychologist, you need to be a good clinical psychologist. So really go study those clinical classes. I can tell those neuropsychologists that don't really like a lot of therapy, including myself. Every time a patient talks about suicide, the room gets right.
Mhm.
No, also be okay with talking about with your patient about uncomfortable things, right? Nobody loves being the one that says, hey, you have a neurodegenerative illness and you will die in 3 4 years. That's also not a fun conversation to have,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
if you are actually empathic and you know how to say it and you know you're reminding the patient and the family, this is just an illness, right? This is one thing. This is not everything. You're gonna remember your mom or your dad or your family member for, right? But that gives you an answer of what's going on and you can prepare and you can do some of the things. It also helps.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is really encouraging.
Yeah. Become neuropsychologist. Yeah. Any questions? I know Juan loves to talk about norms. That's our topic.
Yeah, thank you for telling us just a little bit of so much, right? So much information, and there we can still go on probably for another hour talking about norms and different tests for different populations. So, we
And
appreciate.
you need to study a lot. I mean, I've been listening to those podcasts and all of that. This is a long life learning experience, even though I'm almost close to being bored. I feel like you're always going to be learning and probably this is also why I like becoming a neuropsychologist, right? I don't think I'd be happy just with like never going to a conference to learn new things. Uh, but
Yeah, and it's only
looking forward to maybe discussing the waste five with some of you if you have had the money to buy for, but I don't know if Fuller has bought it already or not. Okay. I hear it's very different, especially the attention domains and all of that. So I would love to hear what your thoughts are about using the waste four versus the waste five and all of that. So, and is the coding the same? I don't know.
I haven't used it yet at Semel. They're still implementing it slowly, so we haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is running digits, and then they split up the digit span. But running digits is so hard to administer because it is just like, I think 2 digits per second. So I'll have like a little metronome app with the sound off, just like flashing at me, so I know to read the digits on time. But it's pretty intense.
Yeah. Don't you love those tests that are more executive function for the person administering than the that I mean, at some point the patient is like, forget it, I'm not doing that.
Mhm.
But but you're like 2 seconds and running, and yeah, I love those tests. But
Yeah.
again, you need to learn the basics of the ways in order to get to those tests. I'm really excited to then see the ways five.
Hmm.
Um, I always felt that the coding should be uh not the num it should be like the simple digit modalities in which or like the coding from the R bands, the numbers and the symbols is what they do instead of the yeah. So
Drawing of it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a little better for low educated patients that know the 1 to 10. But that could be right there. Norms and education is a topic of ours as norms and bilingual abilities.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think they moved coding before symbol search as well. They switched the order or something. It's supposed to be similar to the Whisk 5, I think, in
okay.
the order of it.
I
Yeah.
haven't done the ways in order. It's like that's I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's fair. No, that's fair.
Yeah, the students that have been with me, we actually learned a lot about like, because I'm a very memory person, so I'm always like, do memory, and then what test did you put in between memory? So I don't do it in order. I know you should, but
Yeah.
right, you need to get the data. Although other adults gonna get tired, what do you do?
Yeah. They are good filler tests for sure. Same with the decafs. So it's like pop in a trail like during a memory delay.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah, and don't leave without doing trails.
Yeah.
Coding and digit span? And that's a question that I got for my internship. If you are in an island and your friend got a brain injury, choose 2 tests that you will use and why. And I'm like, okay, if I'm in an island, I don't think I will be doing any tests, but that's okay. Uh, I understand the magic of the question, but you have to think about those things and why. So that's why talking and thinking about these things is important. But that's a big question that I got on all of my VA interviews for internship.
Wow.
So
How would you answer that? That's a really good question. I don't
yeah.
know.
And do any of the other students want to help out with that?
I think you we talked about this once, and um one of them was the CVLT, I think. Just because it captures various aspects, the memory, attention, some executive functioning, yeah, like various aspects.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, my answer is always digit span and trails. I'm a big digit span and trails. Oh,
That
but
makes
this is something that you should practice when you are getting ready for internship applications.
hmm.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one is a big question because it really helps you, like tells the supervisor that is coming, right? We do those interviews to know if you are teachable, right? And you are in grad school, you are teachable. You want to learn. So that's why we do those things. Uh, but it also tells us how you're thinking, or if you actually have sat down and thought of these things.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, that's why I always give you my 2 cents. So please don't say because my previous supervisor told me to. That's never a good answer. Even oh, we only had that one, may be a better answer than my previous supervisor told me to. Yeah, no. So, but
For those that are
think about
applying for
norms a
internship,
lot. What?
I was gonna say for those that are applying for internship this year, I think it's important to know like because some of the questions that I was asked is, you're giving a scenario and then what tests would you give to the individual? So I think knowing the tests and why, the reason why would be very important. Um,
Yeah.
because they like how Dr. Baena said, they do want to know how you're thinking.
Mhm.
Um, and if you know the tests.
Yeah. And
And
don't be afraid to talk about norms, Edita.
if you speak any other languages, look into it. You'd be really surprised what's out there. I know at all of you, we did a Farsi CVLT. I think it was called the Shiraz, and they had norms and everything. So, yeah, if you speak languages, look into that.
Very much. Yeah. And don't be afraid to contact people from university. I think the Shiraz we got because we contact somebody in Teru or something, and we pretty much just asked, can we borrow? I mean, we had the article and we had the norms, but we didn't have the original list. And we called and they gave it to us. Not that I can do it, but I can do it with an interpreter. But I'm all for we need to learn not only to learn the norms from the US and all of that, but also, most likely you will also have to work with interpreters and translators, and don't be afraid. And they will ask you these questions. Do I do it with 1 second? Do I give or you have to tell them a little quicker, slower. So we know that you know the test when you are teaching the test, right, guys? Yeah. So, well, it was a pleasure talking to you guys. If you have any questions, Juan, feel free to share my email. I'm at all of you. So hopefully, interviews or anything, I can sit with any of you when you're doing your interviews for internship or something and give you some of the questions. That's what we're here for. We Majority of supervisors were excited to have another colleague on the way. That's generally how it should be.
Absolutely.
If I know anybody else, they don't have any other questions. I do want to remind you about filling out the survey. I'm gonna copy the link, post it in the chat.
And I think our next meeting will be April 7th, and that's in person. That's on Monday.
A week from today?
A week from today. Yeah, we have one at the start of the month, and then we have one at the end of the month. So we'll send out an email, but just a reminder.
I'm excited how committed you are to learning neuropsych stuff.
It's been great. I think Fuller really needed like a group for this. So yeah, it's been going well.
Yeah, there is so much to learn and have a community. Um, yeah, you guys know all of some of the tests that I have is because I have created groups, and I'm always like, can you share this? Can you do me do this? Can you do that? So always have a community. That's very important, and always have somebody that you can. Hey, I have a difficult case. Can we discuss? Can I talk to you about it? Very important, no matter what in your career.
All right. Well,
Thank you so much. It's good meeting you and seeing some of you. Um, Hope to see you soon, Edita. And I'm
I'm,
gonna reach out to Matt. He's graduating soon. Uh, he should be finishing, right?
I think
Sepúlveda.
in June, right?
Okay.
yeah, him and another student. I forget what the other student is, but yeah.
Thank
Good.
you, Dr. Baena.
Thank you.
We'll be
Thank
in
you
Thank you
so
touch.
very
much.
much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure